The cold steel of her father's blade pressed against Karga's hip as she stumbled through the underbrush, her breath coming in ragged gasps that burned her throat with every inhale. Behind her, somewhere in the darkening forest, the war drums of her clan still echoed, but they were fading now, replaced by the sound of her own heartbeat pounding in her ears and the rustle of leaves beneath her feet. She had been cast out 3 hours ago, stripped of her armor and her honor, exiled for the unforgivable crime of refusing to kill a human child who had wandered too close to orc territory during the last raid. Her mother had wept, her father had turned his back, and her younger brother had been the one to shove her past the boundary stones with disgust written across his features. Now she was alone, weaponless except for the single blade her grandmother had pressed into her hands in those final moments, crossing into lands where her green skin and tusks would mark her as an enemy to be killed on sight. The trees began to thin as night settled properly over the world, and Karga felt her legs trembling with exhaustion. She had not eaten since dawn, had not drunk anything since midday, and the adrenaline that had carried her this far was finally beginning to ebb. The forest gave way to rolling fields, and in the distance, she could see the warm glow of lamplight from what looked like a small farmhouse, isolated and alone on the frontier. Every instinct told her to avoid it, to keep moving, to find shelter in the wild places where no human eyes would find her. But her body was failing her, and as she took another step forward her vision swam and she felt herself pitching forward onto the hard, packed earth of a dirt road. When consciousness returned, it came slowly and painfully. Karga's first awareness was of warmth, blessed warmth that seemed to seep into her bones after the chill of the autumn night. Her second awareness was of softness beneath her, some kind of bedding that cradled her battered body. Her third awareness was of danger, because she could hear movement nearby, the quiet sounds of someone going about their business, and she forced her eyes open despite the pounding in her skull. The room was small and simple, with rough wooden walls and a low ceiling. She was lying on a narrow bed near a stone fireplace where flames crackled cheerfully, and across the room a man was standing with his back to her, doing something at a wooden table. He was tall for a human, broad across the shoulders, with dark hair that fell past his collar. He wore simple clothes, a homespun shirt and rough trousers, and as Karga watched he turned slightly and she caught sight of his profile. His face was weathered, marked by sun and wind with a strong jaw shadowed by several days of stubble. He looked to be perhaps 30 years of age, maybe a bit younger, and there was a stillness to him that spoke of someone accustomed to solitude. Karga tried to sit up, and immediately regretted it as pain lanced through her side. She must have made some sound because the man turned sharply, his hand going instinctively to his belt where a knife hung in a worn leather sheath. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other, human and orc, natural enemies caught in an impossible situation. "You are awake," he said finally, and his voice was surprisingly gentle with a slight roughness that suggested he did not use it often. "Stay still. You hit your head when you fell and you have a fever. I brought you inside last night. Why?" The word came out as a croak, her throat dry and painful. "Why would you help me?" He studied her for a moment longer, then seemed to come to some decision. Moving slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal, he crossed to a small shelf and took down a clay cup. He filled it with water from a pitcher and brought it to her, stopping just out of arm's reach. "Why would I not?" he asked simply. "You were dying in the road. I could not leave you there." Karga wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it, but she feared it would hurt too much. Instead, she pushed herself up slowly, ignoring the way the room spun, and reached for the cup with a hand that shook only slightly. The man placed it in her grasp and stepped back, giving her space, and she drank gratefully, the cool water like a blessing against her parched throat. "My name is Warren Nalan," the man said after she had drained the cup. "This is my farm about 2 miles inside human territory. You crossed the border sometime yesterday, I would guess." "I am Karga," she replied, because it seemed foolish to withhold her name at this point. "I was exiled from my clan. I had nowhere else to go." Warren moved back to the table and returned to whatever he had been doing before she woke, which appeared to be cutting vegetables for some kind of stew. "The border patrols do not come this far west very often," he said, his tone conversational. "Too remote. But you should know that if anyone sees you here, they will try to kill you. Or worse, they will try to capture you and take you to the garrison at Millbrook." "I know the risks," Karga said quietly. She looked down at herself and realized that someone had removed her torn and muddy outer clothing, leaving her in just her undertunic and leggings. Her father's blade was nowhere to be seen, and alarm spiked through her. "Where is my weapon?" "On the mantel above the fireplace." Warren gestured with his knife without looking up. "I cleaned the mud from it. It is a fine blade, orcish steel, a family heirloom, I would guess." Karga followed his gesture and saw the weapon where he had said, the leather-wrapped hilt catching the firelight. The fact that he had not hidden it or kept it from her said something about this strange human, though she was not sure what. "It was my grandmother's," she heard herself say. "She gave it to me when I was cast out. Why were you exiled?" Warren asked, and there was genuine curiosity in his voice, not judgment. The question hung in the air between them, and Karga found herself answering even though she had not planned to. "There was a raid 2 weeks ago. One of your villages near the border. I was part of the war party, though I did not want to be. We were supposed to burn the fields and take what supplies we could carry. But there was a child, a human girl no more than 6 years old. She came out of one of the houses and she was terrified. My war chief ordered me to kill her, to prove my loyalty to the clan. I refused. I put myself between her and the others until her mother came and took her away." She paused, remembering the weight of that moment, the way her entire world had shifted on its axis. "When we returned to Orc lands, I was tried before the clan elders. They said I was weak, that I had betrayed my people for the sake of a human. They said I was no longer fit to be an orc, so they took everything from me and sent me away." Warren had stopped cutting vegetables and was looking at her now with an expression she could not quite read. "You saved a child's life," he said slowly, "and your people punished you for it." "Orcs and humans are at war," Karga replied, though the words felt hollow in her mouth. "There is no mercy, no compassion, only survival. That is what I was taught from the time I could walk." "That is what I was taught as well," Warren said quietly. "I was a soldier once in the border wars. I saw what orcs could do. I saw villages burned, friends killed, innocents slaughtered. I learned to hate your kind with everything in me." He turned back to his vegetables, his movements precise and controlled. "But then I saw what humans could do as well. I saw us do the same things to orc settlements. I saw children killed, homes destroyed, cruelty for the sake of cruelty. After 5 years of fighting, I could not tell the difference anymore between the monsters and the heroes. So I left. I came out here to the edge of nowhere and I built this farm. I have been here for 3 years now, and I have not raised a blade against anyone, orc or human, in all that time." The stew Warren made was simple but filling, thick with root vegetables and herbs and chunks of salted pork. He served it to Karga in a wooden bowl and they ate together in silence, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the soft patter of rain that had begun to fall outside. She found herself studying him covertly, noticing things she had missed in those first moments of waking. There were scars on his hands, the kind that came from hard labor, and another that cut across his left forearm, pale and old. His eyes were blue, pale as winter ice, but there was warmth in them when he looked at her, a quiet kindness that made something in her chest ache. "You can stay until you are well enough to travel," Warren said when the meal was done. "After that, I do not know what you will do. The frontier is dangerous, especially for someone alone, but I will not turn you out before you have recovered your strength." "Why are you doing this?" Karga asked again, because she could not understand it. "I am your enemy. Everything you were taught tells you to kill me or drive me away. Yet you fed me and gave me shelter and speak to me as if I am a person, not a monster." Warren looked at her for a long moment, and something passed across his face, some old pain or memory. "Because you are a person," he said simply. "And because the woman I loved was killed in the war, caught in a rage she had nothing to do with, cut down by an orc blade while she was tending her garden. I could have let that turn me into something cruel and bitter. For a long time it did. But eventually I realized that hating an entire people for the actions of a few was what had caused all of this in the first place. So I made a choice. I chose to be something different." He stood up and took their empty bowls to the basin. "You made a choice too when you saved that child. So I am repaying that kindness, even if you will never know the child you saved or see the life she will live because of you." That night, Karga slept in Warren's bed while he made himself a pallet on the floor near the fire. She protested, but he waved her objections away, saying that she needed the rest more than he did. She lay awake for a long time, staring at the rough beams of the ceiling and listening to the rain drumming on the roof. Her entire life had been built on certainties, on the clear lines between orc and human, enemy and friend, right and wrong. But in the space of a single day, all of those certainties had crumbled, and she found herself adrift in a world that no longer made sense. The days that followed fell into an unexpected rhythm. Karga's fever broke on the second morning, and though she was still weak, she insisted on helping Warren with the farm work. He tried to refuse at first, but she was stubborn, and eventually he relented. The work was hard but satisfying, nothing like the constant training and raiding that had filled her life in the orc lands. Here there was planting to be done despite the lateness of the season, winter crops to be prepared, animals to be tended. Warren had a small flock of chickens, a milk cow, and a sturdy plow horse that eyed Karga with suspicion for the first few days before eventually deciding she was acceptable. They did not talk much at first, working side by side in a comfortable silence that surprised them both. But gradually, as the days stretched into a week and then two, they began to open up to each other. Karga told Warren about life in the orc clans, about the constant struggle for status and respect, the harsh code of honor that governed everything. She told him about her mother, who had been a fierce warrior before age and injury had slowed her, and about her father, the war chief who had been forced to choose between his daughter and his duty. She told him about her grandmother, who had taught her to see beyond the narrow confines of clan law, who had whispered stories of a time before the wars when orcs and humans had sometimes traded and even been friends. Warren in turn told her about his life before the farm, about growing up in a small village near the capital, about joining the army at 18 because it had seemed like an adventure. He told her about the woman he had loved, whose name had been Diana, about how they had planned to marry when his service was done. He told her about the day he had come back from patrol to find her dead, about how something inside him had broken and never quite healed. And he told her about the day he had finally walked away from it all, unable to bear the weight of more death, more hatred, more endless cycles of revenge. "You ever regret it?" Karga asked one afternoon as they worked together to repair a section of fence that had been damaged by a fallen tree. Leaving your old life behind, Warren hammered in a nail, testing the strength of the repair before answering. Sometimes, he admitted. I miss having purpose, being part of something larger than myself, but I do not miss what I had become. The killing, the hatred, the way every day felt like I was losing another piece of my humanity. This life is harder in some ways, lonelier. But it is mine, and it is honest, and I can sleep at night without dreaming of blood. Karga nodded slowly, understanding that sentiment more than she would have thought possible a month ago. I feel the same, she said quietly. I miss my family, my clan. I miss having a place where I belonged. But I cannot regret the choice I made. That little girl deserved to live. No amount of clan honor is worth her death. Then we are both exiles, Warren said, and there was something in his voice that made her look up, meeting his pale blue eyes. Outcasts from our own people, living on the edges of the world. Perhaps that is not such a bad thing, Karga replied, and she was surprised to find that she meant it. The first frost came in late October, coating the fields in white and turning the morning air sharp and cold. Karga woke early that day, as she had every day since her arrival, and found Warren already up and building up the fire. They had fallen into an easy domesticity, moving around each other in the small farmhouse with practiced efficiency. She made breakfast while he went to tend the animals, then they ate together, before heading out to the fields for whatever work the day required. But on this particular morning, as Karga was returning from the chicken coop with a basket of eggs, she heard the sound of hoofbeats on the road. Warren heard them too, his head snapping up from where he was mending a harness. Their eyes met across the yard, and she saw the alarm in his expression. "Get inside," he said quietly but urgently. "Stay away from the windows." Karga did not argue. She ran for the house, her heart pounding, and ducked inside just as 3 riders came into view around the bend in the road. She pressed herself against the wall beside the window, peering out carefully, and felt her stomach drop as she recognized the uniforms. Border Patrol, human soldiers tasked with keeping the frontier safe from orc incursions. Warren had not moved, standing calmly in the middle of his yard as the riders approached. The leader, a hard-faced man with sergeant's stripes on his sleeve, reined in his horse and looked down at Warren with casual authority. "Morning," the sergeant said. "We are doing sweeps of the border farms, checking for signs of orc activity. There have been reports of a lone orc, a female, seen in this area about 3 weeks back. You seen anything unusual?" "Nothing unusual," Warren replied, his voice steady and easy. "It has been quiet out here, same as always." The sergeant's eyes narrowed slightly, scanning the farmyard with professional thoroughness. "You live alone out here, Nalan?" "I do. Must get lonely." The sergeant dismounted, his boots hitting the ground with a thud. "Mind if we have a look around, just procedure?" Karga felt ice flood her veins. From her vantage point she could see Warren's jaw tighten, but he nodded, stepping aside with a gesture that encompassed the yard. "Help yourself, though I am not sure what you expect to find." The 3 soldiers began to search, poking into the barn, checking the animal pens, looking for any sign of an orc presence. Karga knew that if they came inside she was finished. Her blade was still on the mantel, and she moved quietly to retrieve it, the familiar weight of the hilt settling into her palm. If they found her, she would not go quietly. She would fight, and she would likely die, but she would not let them take her. But then she heard Warren's voice, louder than necessary, and she realized he was deliberately drawing their attention. "Had some problems with wolves last month," he was saying to the sergeant. "Lost one of my chickens before I managed to drive them off." You do not happen to know if the garrison has any spare ammunition. I am running low, the sergeant grunted, interested despite himself. Wolves are bad this year. We have had similar reports. I can send someone by with supplies next week if you need them. I would appreciate that. Warren's tone was casual, friendly, everything calculated to keep the soldiers focused on him and away from the house. Gets dangerous out here come winter. Good to know the patrol is keeping an eye on things. They talked for another 10 minutes, the soldiers gradually losing interest in their search as Warren spun stories about farm life and frontier survival. Finally, the sergeant remounted his horse, apparently satisfied that there was nothing here worth their time. You see anything suspicious, you send word to Millbrook, he said. Command is taking this orc sighting seriously. Cannot have those savages thinking they can wander into human lands without consequences. Of course, Warren agreed. I will keep my eyes open. Karga waited until the hoofbeats had faded completely before she emerged from her hiding place. Warren was still standing in the yard, his shoulders tense, and when he saw her, he let out a long breath. That was too close, he said quietly. You protected me, Karga said, and she could not quite keep the wonder from her voice. You lied to your own people to protect me. You are my people now, Warren replied, and the simple certainty in his words made her heart skip a beat. Come on. Let us get inside before anyone else decides to pay a visit. That night the temperature dropped sharply, and Warren insisted they move Karga's sleeping pallet closer to the fire for warmth. They sat up late, neither of them able to sleep after the scare of the day, talking in low voices about everything and nothing. At some point, Karga found herself describing the festivals her clan had celebrated, the great hunts and coming-of-age ceremonies, the storytelling traditions that stretched back generations. Warren listened with genuine interest, asking questions, laughing at the funny parts, and she realized with a start that she had never had a conversation like this with anyone in her clan. There had always been formality, hierarchy, the constant awareness of status and rank. But here, in this small farmhouse at the edge of nowhere, she could just be herself. You think peace is possible? She asked as the fire burned down to embers. Between orcs and humans, I mean. Do you think we could ever stop fighting? Warren was quiet for a long moment, staring into the dying flames. I used to think it was impossible, he said finally. The hatred runs too deep. The wounds are too fresh. Every generation grows up hearing stories of atrocities committed by the other side, and the cycle continues. He looked at her then, his pale eyes reflecting the firelight. But then you are here and I am here, and we are not trying to kill each other. So maybe it is not impossible, just very, very difficult. My grandmother used to say that change comes one person at a time, Karga said softly. She said that if enough individuals chose compassion over hatred, eventually the whole world would have to follow. She sounds like a wise woman. She was. Karga felt the familiar ache of loss. I wish she could have seen this, seen us. I think it would have made her happy. Warren reached out then, slowly enough that she could have pulled away if she wanted to, and placed his hand over hers where it rested on her knee. His skin was warm, calloused from work, and she found herself turning her palm up to lace her fingers through his. They sat like that until the fire went out completely, neither of them speaking, just drawing comfort from the connection. November brought snow, great white drifts that transformed the frontier into a pristine wilderness. The farm work slowed to a minimum, just the daily tasks of feeding animals and keeping the paths clear, and Karga and Warren spent more time inside, close to the fire. They had settled into an easy intimacy, comfortable with touches and glances, though neither had spoken aloud what was growing between them. Warren taught Karga to read, using his small collection of books and a slate he had salvaged from a ruined schoolhouse years before. She was a quick study, picking up the human letters and words with surprising speed, and she delighted in the stories they unlocked. In turn, she taught him some of the Orcish language, the guttural syllables that sounded harsh but could be surprisingly beautiful in the right context. They also sparred together in the cleared space of the barn, Warren showing her human fighting techniques while she demonstrated Orcish combat styles. And these sessions often ended with them laughing breathlessly, sprawled in the hay, closer than was strictly proper. One snowy afternoon in mid-November, as they were sitting together near the fire with books in their laps, Karga looked up to find Warren watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "I was just thinking," Warren said slowly, "about how different my life is now compared to 3 months ago, how much fuller it feels, how much less lonely." He set his book aside, turning to face her fully. "You have become important to me, Karga. More important than I think I realized until just now." Her heart was beating too fast, and she could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, turning her green skin a darker shade. "You have become important to me as well," she admitted. "I never expected to find a home again after I was exiled. I thought I would wander until I died or was killed. But this place, this life with you, it feels like home in a way the Orc lands never did." "Then stay," Warren said simply. "Not just until spring or until you are strong enough to move on. Stay permanently. Help me work this farm. Build a life here with me." He paused, and she could see vulnerability in his eyes, the fear of rejection. "I know it is dangerous. I know that if we are discovered there will be consequences, but I do not care anymore. I would rather have you here and face those risks than live safely alone." Karga felt tears pricking at her eyes, an unfamiliar sensation that she did not entirely understand. "You truly want that," she whispered. "You want me to stay, even knowing what I am, what people would say." "Especially knowing what you are," Warren replied. He reached out and cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone just below her pointed ear. "You are brave and strong and kind. You sacrificed everything for what you believed was right. You are exactly the person I want beside me." She kissed him then, leaning forward to press her lips to his, and it was awkward at first, their tusks getting in the way. But they figured it out, adjusting angles until it felt right. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and she melted into his embrace, feeling safe and wanted for the first time in her life. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard, and Warren rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said quietly, the words barely more than a whisper. "I know it is too soon, I know it is impossible, but it is true. I love you, Karga." "I love you too," she replied, and saying it out loud felt like magic, like a spell that could change the world. "I love you, Warren Nolan, and I will stay with you for as long as you will have me." They made love that night, exploring each other with tender care, learning the ways their different bodies fit together. It was sweet and intense and occasionally humorous. And when it was done, they lay tangled together in Warren's bed, completely content. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in white, and for a little while it felt like they were the only two people alive, safe in their small sanctuary at the edge of civilization. Winter settled in hard after that, the temperatures dropping until the water in the well froze overnight and the animals huddled in the barn for warmth. Warren and Karga worked together to keep the farm functioning, hauling wood for the fire, breaking ice so the livestock could drink, rationing their food supplies carefully to make it through until spring. The work was exhausting but satisfying, and they fell into bed each night too tired for anything but sleep, wrapped around each other for warmth. It was during this time that Karga truly began to understand what love meant. It was not the dramatic gestures or grand declarations, though those had their place. It was Warren bringing her hot tea on the coldest mornings without being asked. It was her mending his favorite shirt when it tore. It was the way they moved around each other in the small space of the house, perfectly synchronized after months of practice. It was laughter shared over small things, comfort offered during moments of sadness, and the absolute certainty that they would face whatever came next together. The first real test of that certainty came in early January, when a blizzard swept across the frontier with unprecedented fury. Warren had seen it coming, reading the signs in the sky and the behavior of the animals, and they had prepared as best they could. But even so, when the storm hit, it was worse than anything either of them had experienced. The wind howled like a living thing, driving snow horizontally across the fields, and the temperature dropped so low that breathing hurt. They brought the animals into the barn and barricaded themselves in the house, keeping the fire burning continuously and rationing their wood carefully. The storm lasted 3 days, and by the end of it, their wood supply was dangerously low. On the 4th day, when the wind finally died and the sun emerged, Warren knew they had no choice. They would have to go into the forest and cut more wood, despite the danger and the cold. "I will go," Warren said as they stood together looking out at the transformed landscape, everything buried under several feet of snow. "You stay here where it is warm." "Absolutely not," Karga replied firmly. "It will take both of us to cut and haul enough wood to last the rest of the winter. And besides," she added with a slight smile, "I am stronger than you. I can carry more." Warren wanted to argue, but he knew she was right. So they bundled up in every piece of warm clothing they owned, strapped on snowshoes that Warren had made years before, and set out into the frozen wilderness with an axe and a saw. The work was brutal. Even with snowshoes, each step was a struggle, and the cold bit through their layers to chill their bones. They made it to a stand of dead trees about a mile from the farm and began the laborious process of cutting them down and sectioning them into manageable pieces. Karga was indeed stronger, her orcish physique giving her an advantage when it came to the heavy labor. But even she was flagging by the time they had accumulated what they judged to be enough wood for several weeks. They were loading the wood onto the sled Warren had dragged behind him when Karga heard something that made her freeze. It was a distant sound, muffled by snow and wind, but unmistakable. Wolves. And they were howling in a way that suggested they had found prey. "Warren," she said urgently, and he looked up from securing the rope, immediately reading the alarm in her posture. "We need to go. Now." They did not make it 10 feet before the wolves appeared, a pack of 6 lean and desperate animals, driven from their normal territory by the storm and hunger. The lead wolf, a huge gray male, bared his teeth and growled, and the others fanned out to surround them. Warren had his knife, and Karga had her grandmother's blade, but both of them knew that they were in serious trouble. "Stay behind me," Warren said, but Karga laughed, a sharp bark of sound that had no humor in it. "I am a warrior, remember," she said, moving to stand shoulder to shoulder with him. "We fight together or not at all." The wolves attacked in a rush, all of them at once, and for a few desperate minutes it was chaos. Warren took one down with his knife, driving the blade into its throat, while Karga's sword flashed in the weak winter sunlight, catching another across the ribs. But there were too many of them, and they were so very hungry. Karga felt teeth sink into her left arm, and she roared, swinging her blade in a desperate arc that sent the wolf yelping away. Warren was bleeding from a gash on his leg, limping badly, and the remaining wolves were circling for another attack. Then Karga did something she had not done since leaving the orc lands. She threw back her head and let out a war cry, the full-throated battle roar of an orcish warrior, and the sound echoed across the frozen landscape like thunder. The wolves hesitated, confused and frightened by this unexpected noise, and in that moment of hesitation Karga attacked. She moved with the speed and ferocity she had been trained for since childhood, her blade singing as it cut through the air. 2 more wolves fell, and the remaining 2 decided that this prey was too dangerous and fled, disappearing into the forest. Karga stood panting, her arm bleeding steadily, and turned to check on Warren. He was leaning heavily on the sled, his face pale but his eyes bright with admiration. "That was amazing," he said, and she could hear the pain underneath the words. "But we need to get back. My leg is bad." The journey back to the farm was a nightmare. Warren could barely walk, leaning on Karga for support, and she was feeling lightheaded from blood loss. They abandoned the sled, focusing all their energy on simply making it home. By the time the farmhouse came into view, Karga was half carrying Warren, and she used the last of her strength to get him inside and onto the bed. For the next week, they nursed each other through fever and infection. Warren's leg wound was deep, requiring careful cleaning and bandaging, and Karga's arm was torn badly enough that she worried it might never heal properly. They took turns being strong for each other, mixing herbs for poultices, forcing down broth even when neither had an appetite, keeping the fire going despite their weakness. It was during one of the long nights when both of them were too feverish to sleep that Warren reached out and took Karga's hand. "If something happens to me," he said, his voice rough, "I want you to know that these months with you have been the happiest of my life. You gave me something I thought I had lost forever: hope, purpose, love. Whatever happens, I am grateful for that." "Nothing is going to happen to you," Karga said fiercely, squeezing his hand. "We did not survive exile and war and wolves just to give up now. We are going to get through this, and when spring comes, we are going to plant the best crops this farm has ever seen, and we are going to build a life that would make both of our grandmothers proud." Warren smiled weakly. "Is that a promise?" "It is a vow," Karga replied. "And I have never broken a vow in my life." Slowly, painfully, they healed. By late January, both of them were back on their feet, though Warren walked with a slight limp that he said would probably never fully go away, and Karga's arm bore an impressive scar that she secretly thought looked rather distinguished. The wolf attack had taught them both just how fragile their situation was, how dependent they were on each other for survival, and it had strengthened their bond even further. February brought a brief warm spell, a false spring that melted some of the snow and gave them a chance to replenish their wood supply properly. They worked together in comfortable silence, and Karga found herself thinking about the future in a way she never had before. She wanted this life, wanted it with an intensity that sometimes surprised her. She wanted to see the farm thrive, wanted to watch the seasons turn, wanted to grow old beside Warren and see what kind of people they could become. But the question that haunted her was whether that future was actually possible. They were living on borrowed time, she knew. Every day that she remained in human territory was a risk, and sooner or later their luck would run out. The border patrol could return for another inspection. A traveler could stop by and see her. Word could spread. And when that happened, Warren would be arrested for harboring an enemy, and she would be killed or worse. She was mulling over these dark thoughts one evening when Warren came to sit beside her near the fire. He had been quieter than usual all day, and she wondered if he was thinking along similar lines. But when he spoke, It was to surprise her with something she had not expected. "I have been thinking," he said slowly, choosing his words with care, "about how we can make this work long-term. How we can build a real life together without constantly looking over our shoulders." He paused, running a hand through his hair. "There are places far to the west beyond the frontier settlements, wild lands that no one has claimed yet. I have heard stories from other veterans, men who went out there and built new lives away from all the politics and hatred. We could do that. We could leave this farm, travel west, and start over somewhere no one would find us." Karga felt her heart leap at the possibility, but she forced herself to be practical. "That would be dangerous," she said. "Traveling through winter with your legs still healing. And what about this farm? You built it with your own hands. Can you really just walk away from it?" "The farm is just wood and land," Warren replied. "You are what matters. If staying here means constantly risking discovery and death, then it is not worth it. I would rather take the chance on a new beginning than lose you to someone else's hatred." They talked long into the night, weighing options and possibilities. The more they discussed it, the more the idea took hold. A fresh start, somewhere they could live openly without fear, where their love would not be a crime or a scandal. It felt like a dream, something too good to be true, but also like the only real option they had. "We would leave in the spring," Warren said as they were finally settling down to sleep. "After the thaw, when travel is easier. We can sell or trade what we cannot carry and use the proceeds to outfit ourselves properly. It will be hard and dangerous, but we will be together." "Together," Karga echoed, and the word felt like a promise. March arrived with its usual chaos of melting snow and mud, and Warren and Karga began to prepare in earnest for their departure. It was bittersweet work, sorting through 3 years of accumulated possessions, deciding what was essential and what could be left behind. Warren built a sturdy cart that could be pulled by his plow horse, and they packed it carefully with tools, seeds, preserved food, and other supplies they would need to establish a new homestead. They decided to leave in mid-April, as soon as the roads were passable, and the days leading up to their departure were filled with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Karga found herself memorizing every detail of the little farmhouse, the way the morning light came through the east window, the creak of the floorboards by the door, the smell of wood smoke and herbs that had become so familiar. This had been her first real home since her exile, and leaving it hurt more than she had expected. But the night before they were set to leave, everything changed. They were sitting down to a simple dinner, their last meal in the farmhouse, when they heard horses outside. Multiple horses, moving fast. Warren's eyes met Karga's across the table, and she saw her own fear reflected there. He stood quickly, motioning for her to hide, but before she could move, the door burst open and soldiers poured in, swords drawn. There were 5 of them, led by the same sergeant who had visited months before, and his eyes widened in shock and then fury when he saw Karga standing there. "I knew it," he spat. "I knew something was wrong when we were here before. You have been harboring a monster, Nalen. Do you have any idea what the penalty is for that?" "She is not a monster," Warren said, his voice steady despite the swords pointed at his chest. "She is a person, and she has done nothing wrong." "She is an orc," the sergeant snapped. "That is crime enough. Seize them both." The soldiers moved forward, and Karga made a split-second decision. She dove for the mantle, her hand closing around the hilt of her grandmother's blade, and spun to face the attackers. "Stay back," she snarled, and there was nothing human in her voice now, only the fierce anger of a warrior cornered. "I will not go quietly." "Neither will I," Warren said, and he grabbed a knife from the table, moving to stand beside her. They were outnumbered and outmatched, but they would go down fighting if they had to. For a frozen moment, no one moved. Then the door burst open again, and another figure entered, this one wearing the insignia of an officer. He was older than the others, probably in his 50s, with gray threading through his dark hair and the bearing of a man accustomed to command. He took in the scene with quick intelligence, his eyes moving from Warren to Karga and back again. "Stand down," he ordered, and the sergeant started to protest but fell silent at a sharp gesture. The officer stepped forward, his hand resting lightly on his sword hilt but not drawing it. "My name is Captain Wyatt Nash," he said, directing his words primarily at Warren. "I command the garrison at Millbrook. We received a report that an orc has been seen in this area repeatedly, always near this farm. I came to investigate personally." "Then investigate," Warren said flatly. "But you will find that Karga has committed no crimes. She has lived peacefully here for months, harming no one. Her mere presence in human lands is a violation of the border treaty," Captain Nash replied, but his tone was thoughtful rather than condemning. "However, I am also aware that the orc clans sometimes exile their own, particularly those who refuse to follow their more brutal customs." He looked directly at Karga. "I have heard stories, whispered rumors, of an orc woman who saved a human child during a raid and was cast out for her mercy." "Would that be you?" Karga lifted her chin, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Yes. I refused to kill an innocent, so my clan declared me no longer fit to be an orc. I came here because I had nowhere else to go. Warren saved my life, and I have repaid that kindness by helping him work his farm. We have broken no laws except the accident of my birth." The captain was quiet for a long moment, and Karga could see the conflict playing out behind his eyes. Finally, he sighed and turned to his sergeant. "Take your men outside. Wait for me there." "Sir, we have orders to bring in any orcs found in human territory," the sergeant protested. "And I am countermanding those orders," Captain Nash said sharply. "I am the ranking officer here, and what I say goes. Now get out." The soldiers left reluctantly, casting hostile glances at Karga as they went. When they were gone, the captain walked slowly around the room, taking in the domestic details, the two sets of everything, the obvious signs of a shared life. "This puts me in a difficult position," he said finally. "If I arrest you, I am enforcing an unjust law and destroying something that appears to be genuinely good. If I let you go, I am violating my orders and potentially putting my career and my men at risk." "Then let us go," Warren said urgently. "We were planning to leave anyway, to travel west beyond the frontier. If we leave tonight, no one has to know you ever found us. You can report that the orc sighting was a false alarm and we will disappear." Captain Nash shook his head. "If only it were that simple. But my men have already seen her. They will talk, word will spread, and then the entire garrison will be questioning why I let an orc escape." He rubbed his face tiredly. "However, there might be another option. It is risky, and it will require all of us to tell a very specific story, but it could work." He laid out his plan, and as Karga and Warren listened, hope began to kindle in their chests. It was audacious and unlikely, but it just might succeed. According to Captain Nash's version of events, when he and his men had arrived at the farm, they had indeed found an orc, but she had immediately attacked them. There had been a brief fight, and in the chaos the orc had fled into the forest. The soldiers had pursued but lost her trail in the dark. Warren would be cleared of any wrongdoing, since he had obviously been preparing to defend himself when they arrived, and the orc would be officially listed as disappeared, presumed to have died in the wilderness or returned to orc lands. "But here is what will actually happen," the captain continued. "You will both leave tonight as you planned. I will give you a 2-hour head start before I send my men to search for the escaped orc. By the time they start looking, you will be long gone. And I will personally see to it that the patrols are directed away from the western routes for the next month." "Why are you doing this?" Karga asked, unable to keep the suspicion from her voice. "Why would you risk so much for strangers, especially an orc?" Captain Nash smiled sadly. "Because I have seen too much death, too much hatred, too much pointless cruelty in my years of service, and because my daughter would have been about your age now if she had lived. She was killed in an orc raid 15 years ago, and I hated your people for a long time because of that. But hatred has not brought her back. It has not made the world better. It has only made me bitter and old." He looked between them. "You too have found something rare and precious. Love that crosses all the boundaries we have built, that defies all the hatred we have been taught. I will not be the one to destroy that. The world has enough destroyers. Maybe it needs more people who are willing to protect the good things when they find them." Warren stepped forward and offered his hand, and after a moment the captain shook it. "Thank you," Warren said simply. "You will never know what this means to us." "Just promise me something," Captain Nash replied. "Whatever life you build out there in the West, make it count. Make it matter. Show that peace is possible even if no one else ever knows about it." "We promise," Karga said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. They left within the hour, loading their cart in frantic haste and hitching up the horse. Warren cast one last look at the farmhouse he had built, at the life he was leaving behind, and Karga saw the pain of that farewell in his eyes. But when he turned to her, his expression was resolute. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready," she confirmed. They rode through the night, pushing hard to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the farm. Behind them, they heard the sounds of the soldiers beginning their false search, and Karga sent a silent prayer of gratitude to Captain Nash for his unexpected mercy. As dawn broke, they were already miles into the wilderness, following old game trails that Warren remembered from his army days. The journey west was everything they had expected and more. They traveled through forests thick with new growth, across rivers swollen with snowmelt, over mountains that seemed to touch the sky. They encountered dangers both expected and surprising: wild animals, harsh weather, stretches of barren land where water and food were scarce. But they also found beauty: vast prairies carpeted with wildflowers, crystalline lakes that reflected the clouds, ancient forests where the trees grew so large that 10 people could not have circled them with joined hands. They also encountered people, and this was perhaps the most surprising part of their journey. Isolated frontier families who offered them food and shelter without asking too many questions. A mixed community of humans and dwarves who were attempting to build a trading post on the edge of orc territory. A band of orc outcasts, others like Karga who had been exiled for refusing to accept the old ways, who welcomed them to share a campfire and trade stories. The world, it turned out, was more complex and more accepting than either of them had been taught. 2 months after leaving the farm, they came over a rise and saw spread out before them a valley of breathtaking beauty. A river wound through it like a silver ribbon, bordered by rich bottomland perfect for crops. The valley was surrounded by forested hills that would provide timber and game, and in the distance they could see the blue shadows of mountains. It was empty, unclaimed, a blank canvas waiting for someone to make it home. "This is it," Warren said, and Karga knew he was right. They built their new home slowly, taking time to do it properly. Warren laid out the foundation for a larger house than the old farmhouse, with room for expansion, for a family someday. Karga helped him raise the walls and roof, her orcish strength invaluable for the heavy lifting. They cleared fields and planted crops, built a barn and animal pens, constructed a workshop where Warren could pursue his carpentry. Every nail they drove, every stone they laid, felt like an act of defiance against all the forces that had tried to keep them apart. As summer turned to autumn, they received their first visitors, a family of settlers who had heard vague rumors of a homestead in the valley and had come to investigate. There was a tense moment when the husband saw Karga, his hand going to his weapon, but Warren stepped forward calmly and told their story. Not all of it, perhaps, but enough. The man and his wife exchanged glances, and then the wife smiled. "We left our old home because we were tired of the hatred," she said simply. "Tired of teaching our children to fear and despise people they had never met. If you are willing to accept us as neighbors despite our being human, then we are willing to accept you despite your being orc." More families followed over the next year, drawn by word of the valley and the promise of a fresh start. Not all of them stayed. Some could not get past their prejudices, but enough did that within 2 years a small community had formed. It was a strange and wonderful mix. Humans and orcs and even a few others, trolls and goblins and one elderly elf who claimed to have been wandering for centuries. They built homes and shared resources and learned to live together in relative peace. There were conflicts, of course, misunderstandings and old resentments bubbling up, but they worked through them, committed to making this experiment in coexistence succeed. Warren and Karga became unofficial leaders of the community, the founders whose example others looked to. They helped mediate disputes, organized work parties for large projects, and opened their home to anyone who needed help. And through it all, their love continued to grow and deepen, becoming the foundation that everything else was built upon. In the spring of their 3rd year in the valley, Warren asked Karga to marry him. It was not a grand gesture, just the two of them standing in their fields at sunset, surrounded by the first green shoots of wheat. "I know our cultures have different traditions," he said, holding both of her hands in his. "But I want to make a formal commitment to pledge myself to you before whatever gods or spirits might be listening. Will you marry me, Karga? Will you let me be your husband, officially and forever?" Karga felt tears streaming down her face, and she nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. When she finally found her voice, it came out as a whisper. "Yes, yes, I will marry you, Warren Nalan. I will be your wife and you will be my husband, and we will face whatever comes together." They were married a month later in a ceremony that blended human and orcish traditions. The whole community attended. Nearly 40 people gathered in the meadow near the river. An elderly human priest spoke words about love and commitment, while an orc elder Karga had befriended sang the ancient marriage chants of her people. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to honor and support each other, to build a life of compassion and courage, to be an example of what was possible when hatred was set aside. And when they kissed, sealing their union, the crowd erupted in cheers that echoed across the valley. The celebration lasted late into the night, with music and dancing and more food than should have been possible from such a small community. Karga danced with Warren under the stars, her husband now in truth as well as heart, and she felt a joy so complete it was almost painful. She thought of her grandmother, wished desperately that the old woman could have been there to see this, to know that her stories of peace and coexistence had not been mere fantasies. She thought of her family, her clan, and felt a pang of sadness for all they were missing because of their rigid adherence to old hatreds. But mostly she thought of the future, of the life she and Warren would build together, of the children they might have and the example they could set. As if reading her thoughts, Warren pulled her close and whispered in her ear, "What are you thinking about? The future? she replied honestly. Everything we are going to do, everything we are going to be, it feels like the whole world is open to us now. It is, Warren agreed. We made it open. We fought for the right to love each other, and we won. Everything else is just details. 2 years later, those details included a daughter, a perfect blend of human and orc with her mother's green skin and pointed ears, but her father's blue eyes and delicate features. They named her Vera, which meant truth in the old human tongue, because their love and their family were living proof that the truth was more complex and more beautiful than the stories of hatred they had both been taught. Vera grew up surrounded by a community that saw her not as a half-breed or an abomination, but as a symbol of hope, proof that different peoples could not only coexist, but create something new and wonderful together. Other mixed couples formed in the valley, and soon there were more children like Vera, a whole generation growing up without the prejudices that had poisoned their parents' world. Warren and Karga raised their daughter with stories from both of their cultures, teaching her to be proud of all the parts of herself. They taught her to read in both human and orcish script, to fight with both sword and axe, to value both courage and compassion. And above all, they taught her by example what it meant to love someone completely, to choose partnership over prejudice, to build rather than destroy. The valley community prospered over the years, growing from a handful of homesteads to a thriving village of nearly 200 souls. They built a school where all children learned together, a communal hall for gatherings and celebrations, a trading post where merchants from both human and orc territories could meet on neutral ground. Word of their success spread slowly, and while there were still plenty of people on both sides who viewed them with suspicion or outright hostility, there were also those who were inspired by their example. On their 10th anniversary of arriving in the valley, Warren and Karga stood on the porch of their home, now expanded to accommodate not just Vera, but also the twins who had arrived 3 years later, a boy and a girl named Marcus and Kira. They watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and Warren slipped his arm around his wife's waist. "You ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Leaving your clan, your people, everything you knew?" Karga leaned her head against his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, wood smoke and fresh earth and home. "Never," she said firmly. "Everything I lost, I gained back 100-fold. I have a family who loves me, a community that accepts me, a purpose that matters. And I have you." She turned to look up at him, seeing the silver beginning to thread through his dark hair, the lines of care and laughter around his eyes. "You saved me, Warren, not just that first night when you brought me inside, but every day since. You showed me that love is stronger than hatred, that compassion is braver than cruelty. You gave me a reason to believe the world could be better." "We saved each other," Warren corrected gently. "And we are making the world better, one day at a time, one person at a time. Just like your grandmother said." From inside the house, they could hear Vera laughing at something one of the twins had said, and the sound was like music, like hope made audible. Karga smiled, feeling the kind of contentment she had never imagined possible back in those dark days after her exile. She had crossed into human territory with nothing but a blade and a desperate hope for survival. She had found instead a home, a family, a love that defied all the old boundaries and hatreds. And in finding those things, she had helped create something new, a place where orc and human could live and love and raise children together in peace. It was not a perfect world, not yet. There were still wars being fought, still prejudices being taught, still so much hatred poisoning the relationship between their peoples. But here in this valley, in this small corner of the world, they had proven that another way was possible. And that proof, fragile and precious as it was, might someday grow into something larger, something that could change everything. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Warren and Karga went inside to join their children for dinner, closing the door on another day in the life they had built together. And in that simple domestic act, in the choice to love rather than hate, to build rather than destroy, to hope rather than despair, lay a quiet revolution that would echo through generations yet to come. The story of the banished orc girl who crossed into human territory with nothing but a blade became a legend in the valley, passed down to children and grandchildren, embellished and refined with each telling. But the truth at its heart remained unchanged. Love had triumphed over hatred. Courage had defeated fear. And two people who should have been enemies had instead become the foundation of something beautiful and new. Years continued to pass, measured in seasons and harvests, in children born and elders passing peacefully in their sleep, in the gradual expansion of the valley community. Warren's hair turned fully gray and then white, and Karga found that she too was aging, though more slowly than her human husband. They both bore the marks of a life fully lived, scars from accidents and illnesses, lines from laughter and worry, the slight stiffness of joints worked hard for decades. But they were together, and that made every ache and pain worthwhile. Vera grew into a strong and capable young woman, taking after her mother in her sense of justice and her father in his quiet wisdom. She eventually fell in love with a young human man from one of the newer families in the valley, and Warren and Karga hosted a wedding that was even larger and more joyous than their own had been. The twins followed different paths, Marcus becoming a teacher at the valley school, while Kira developed a talent for diplomacy, traveling between the valley and other settlements to promote trade and understanding. On a summer evening when Warren was approaching 60 and Karga was showing only slight signs of middle age, they walked together to the spot where they had been married, the meadow by the river. The community had placed a stone there years before, marking it as a place of significance, and they often came here to remember and to reflect. "I have been thinking," Warren said as they settled onto the grass, "about everything that had to happen for us to find each other. If you had not saved that child, if I had not been living on that particular farm, if Captain Nash had not shown us mercy, if any one of 1,000 things had been different, we might never have met. It seems almost impossible." "Perhaps it was impossible," Karga replied. "Perhaps we made the impossible happen, simply by refusing to accept that it could not be done." She took his hand, feeling the familiar rough texture of his palm against hers. Or perhaps the world was waiting for someone to take that first step, to prove that peace was possible. "We were just the ones brave enough or foolish enough to try." Warren chuckled, the sound warm and rich. "Probably more foolish than brave, at least at first, but I am glad we tried. I am glad for every moment we have had together, every challenge we have overcome, every life we have touched." "This has been a good life, Karga, the best life I could have imagined." "It is not over yet," Karga pointed out with a smile. "We still have years ahead of us, many more adventures to share." "True," Warren agreed. "But even so, I want you to know now, while I can say it clearly, that you are the best thing that ever happened to me. You are my heart, my home, my hope for a better world. Whatever comes, that will never change." Karga felt tears pricking at her eyes, a sensation that had become more common as she aged but never less powerful. "And you are mine," she said softly. "My rescuer, my partner, my love. I was banished from my own lands and lost everything. But in losing it, I found you, and that made it all worthwhile." They sat together as the sun set, painting the valley in shades of amber and rose, and watched their grandchildren playing in the distance, their laughter carrying on the warm evening breeze. The future stretched out before them, uncertain but full of possibility, and they faced it as they had faced everything else since that night when a desperate orc girl had collapsed on a lonely road, and a lonely farmer had made the choice to offer her kindness instead of cruelty. In the end, that was what their story came down to. One choice made in a moment of compassion that had rippled outward to change countless lives. One act of mercy that had grown into a family, a community, a living demonstration that love was stronger than hatred, that peace was possible if people were willing to fight for it. And as the stars began to emerge overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their first tentative steps toward each other, Warren and Karga sat hand in hand and knew that they had done something rare and precious. They had taken the broken pieces of their lives and forged them into something beautiful. They had crossed boundaries that were supposed to be uncrossable, loved when they were supposed to hate, and built a future that was supposed to be impossible. They had won, in every way that mattered. And their victory, small as it might seem in the grand scope of the world, was absolute and unshakable. It lived in their children and grandchildren, in the community they had helped create, in the example they had set for all who had eyes to see. The banished orc girl had crossed into human territory with nothing but a blade, expecting death, or at best a life of lonely survival. Instead, she had found love, family, purpose, and joy beyond measure. She had found a home, not in a place but in a person, and together they had made that home into something that would endure long after they were gone. It was, by any measure, a happy ending. And it was real and true and theirs forever.